Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out ProRevenge. Story 1. Better check your facts because people know people. Had to post this one, it isn't petty, it isn't regular, and it ruined a guy's journalistic career. The internet has evolved quite a lot over the years. Some people may remember Usenet groups, I know I do, used to have a lot of fun reading them. Kind of similar in a way to today's Reddit in a way, no matter what the subject was, someone would have a Usenet news group for it. But unlike today's Reddit, it was strictly text. You could download images, but they would take forever to download, and could often be across several different messages, just one of the messages missing, and you wouldn't get the image. Things then improved, download speed slowly got faster, and then there was IRC that came about. IRC saw the same thing, there was chat room for anything and everything, and if there wasn't, you could clearly create it. If you were to try to watch a video over the internet back then, it could take you a couple of hours to download a music video, you get the idea. This is important for the context of the story. I was a writer on a couple of wrestling newsletters during the mid to late 90s. We only published our newsletters online, you could have it emailed to you, or go to a website to read it, think we hosted on GeoCities or Tripod. Both wrestling newsletters were independent of each other, and I used different nicknames on each. One was more a review and preview newsletter, where we would post reviews of the most recent shows/events, talk about current feuds, and talk about what we may think will happen in the next big event. The other newsletter was a news and rumors newsletter, with a few fun puzzles/competitions thrown in to keep things interesting. At the time, you had a few big-name wrestling news and rumors websites, and a handful of small ones. I was a writer on one of the small ones. Sometimes we would get news and rumors from the big-name websites, giving them credit where appropriate. Sometimes, we would hear things from people in the business, everyone had their sources of information. And sometimes we would make an educated guess on possible scenarios, based on current trends in the industry. It did get a bit cutthroat at times, with some newsletters claiming that they broke the news first, when it had already been published in other newsletters first. And you would even have some newsletters devote all of their time trying to rubbish the other newsletters for publishing false and misleading information. It was rumors, we did not always get it right. Through a couple of readers of my first wrestling newsletter, I learned of a huge surprise in the works for one organization, which could potentially lead to something happening at a big event coming up. I won't mention the surprise, but it involved a person from another sport. No other wrestling newsletter had reported it, so I included it as a rumor on the second wrestling newsletter. I was instantly rubbished by one of the major wrestling newsletters at the time, publishing a clearly nonsense rumor that would never happen, only for that very same newsletter to publish the exact same rumor 2 or 3 days later, and claim to be the first ones to publish it. This sort of stuff happened all the time, it did not bother me at all. Anyway, I happened to have a few wrestlers who actually read my first newsletter, no big names as such, but a couple of lesser-known wrestlers in the big organizations. I knew who they were, but refused to reveal their identities back then, and refused to reveal them now. One of them let me know of an unknown fact from a major match a couple of years earlier, it was to do with an injury that happened during a part of the match. This fact had never been published anywhere else at the time. I mentioned that I wrote for another wrestling newsletter, that dealt with news and rumors, and asked if I could repeat the information. The wrestler said sure, but not to credit him. So I go ahead and publish the rumor. Straight away I had another of the smaller wrestling newsletters say that it was nonsense. They said that it was impossible for the match to have continued, had the injury happened. They then started a smear campaign on the second newsletter. I was getting spam emails constantly, virus attempts originating from the competition. The competition even went so far as claiming that they had the full story of my wife of 10 years working as a hooker. Don't ask. They were trying to find anything to smear me with. There was more sinister and disgusting stuff, but I won't write it here. Why it got so personal, I do not know, but the funny thing was that at the time, I was a 22-year-old single university student, and if I had a wife of 10 years who was working as a hooker, I would have had to marry her when I was 12. But his smear campaign was working, our readership dropped by nearly 50%. It was time to get some revenge, although I had no idea just how far the revenge would end up reaching. Firstly, I approached one of the bigger wrestling newsletters. They would often run ads at the bottom or rear of their newsletters, for affiliated newsletters. I organized a new affiliation with them, removing an affiliation they had with the competition. Small potatoes. I started promoting the second newsletter heavily on Usenet, in some of the wrestling groups, which ultimately led to an increase in our email subscription base, greater than what it was before his smear campaign. This negated any effect that his smear campaign had, but I was hungry for more. I wanted to shove it where the sun don't shine, so I contacted those wrestlers who read my first newsletter. I explained the situation to them, and they were happy to help out. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually I was able to post a link to a 15-second video, hosted on a GeoCities web page, as well as on a Wrestling Usenet group, where the wrestler at the center of the injury rumor not only confirmed it, but gave a shout out to my second newsletter. While it validated me and my information, it still didn't shut the other guy up. Finally, a break. While the guy used an alias for his newsletter, he did actually mention his name a couple of times, and where in the US he attended university. Using this information, I was able to get a friend in the US to do some searching for me, attended that very same university, and discovered that the guy had actually completed a journalism degree several years earlier. Further research indicated that he was now working as a reporter for a regional newspaper in the US. His wrestling newsletter must just be a hobby. So I decided to send all of the information I had, his smear campaign etc., to the newspaper office. I don't know what, if anything, it would do, but it was worth a shot. About a month later, I got an email back from the newspaper, thanking me for the information. They discovered that he was using the newspaper's system to run the wrestling newsletter, which was against their policy, so they fired him. And because the newspaper was part of a chain of regional newspapers across the US, he was going to struggle to find another journalism job. The newsletter got shut down as well, because without the newspaper's system to run it, the guy had no way of continuing with the newsletter. Side note, I ended up finishing with my newsletters not long after anyway. The first newsletter, as I was just a writer for it, I finished up with it when the owner of the newsletter decided to close it down. He didn't have the time to devote to it due to work commitments. The second one, I started off as just a writer/contributor, then took over their competitions, then eventually took over the whole newsletter. Original owner didn't want to do it anymore. But in the end, I was finishing up at university, I had to move on with my career, so I closed it down. Story 2. New ownership takes over and guy goes on vacation for 2 years due to stupid new rules. A family friend was working at the same company, since he was 26, up to when he was 64, when the below started. I did get his approval to retell the story, just not include anything specific, so I am keeping it anonymous and quite general on the specific details. Part of the problem was the laws in the country increasing the retirement age from 62 to 65 when he was in his early mid-50s, and then again from 65 to 67 when he was about 62 to 63. The old owners were a family and run the bussiness with benefits to the employees. From everything I have heard, I think they were giving an extra vacation week after every 6 years at the company. So on top of the standard 4 weeks, he had an extra 6 weeks at the time of the events. Also people had access to 2 weeks of working home office, when the job allowed them to, or an extra week off, for those that couldn't use it. So he was getting 11 weeks off each year. As a bonus, the family owners were allowing people above 55 to use their vacation time as they desired. All at once, with about a 2 weeks notice, which was just a courtesy, according to the guy, or segmented or even not use it and pile it up for when the retirement time came. Another issue we have at our country is that when you submit retirement paperwork to the government they take effing ages. So it is often the case that they may take over 2 years to calculate what to pay you and start paying you. Of course they pay back that time, but it still is an issue. For the period they delay and calculate you are getting only the minimum amount. But the guy had already about 44 years FO experience and a bit more ahead of him as an engineer, and a well-paid one, which meant a great retirement amount. So the onwares allowed for people to gather up their weeks of time off at the end of it and take 20 to 30 weeks off while submitting their retirement paperwork, so the money being paid would last them longer into the calculation period. Of course some didn't use it, but many did. So the company gets sold, because the owners saw some writing on the wall that their profiting wouldn't last more than 6 to 7 years more and they wanted out. It was due to old age as well. New ownership, part of some Coca-Cola subsidiary, takes over and starts removing previous rules. At the guy's position there were 3 of them. Him, a second colleague and a third one. They push out the second, fire him, and the third one has a heart attack literally a week later. Rib. They also go and dock his pay by 15% because he is making too much for a simple engineer. The 3 of them hold the patent for the machinery used on something specific, a second one on how to make that machinery and a third one on the process of the production of a small but significant part. Old owner had allowed them to put the patents on them when they invented a new, 30% cheaper and 75% faster, way of production years ago. So suddenly he is alone on that position at 64 and the company hires 6 people for him to train, on that position. At the same time they give up to the end of the year for all the piled up vacation time to be claimed. Notice the wording, claimed not used. So the guy was using between 1 and 5 weeks for the past decade. So he had gathered 87 weeks of time off, including the current year, but they hadn't looked at specific cases apparently. So they get him the 6 new people to train and they tell him that he needs to have them trained in 6 months. He still has 2.3 to 2.5 years until retirement. So he just goes and takes 87 weeks of vacation time, with a 3 hours notice, on a Friday evening starting the upcoming Monday, still no advanced notifying is required. They don't pay attention on it until the next Thursday, when the CEO notices the 6 people sitting around all day and nobody training them. The phone calls start. Then emails. Then letters get added to the mix. Then home visits by low-ranking secretaries and such to deliver the letters. Then management visiting his home. By week 7 the CEO has visited 3 times, but the door hasn't been opened once. His mother-in-law lives literally across the street, old woman, and him and his wife are taking care of her, so most of the time they are over there and can see everybody visiting their house XD. The production is actually running on itself, but no upkeep is done on that critical part of it. Week 11 he says that line 1 out of the 2 breaks down. They start visiting his house 3 to 4 times a day. 2 weeks later second line breaks down. He obviously has a lot of friends inside and is getting constant updates. At that point they have only 4 weeks of backstock to keep the rest of production running. It is December, right before Christ Mass, and he goes in during week 13. He says he needs to take some things from his locker room, lol, and the CEO starts yelling at him. You are stopping your time off right now. You are coming back to work to fix everything up. So he offers to come back for 3 days under an agreement that the entire week will be returned to him to use for time off. The CEO reluctantly agrees and tries to push him also for the training. No budging, only fix things up and go on vacation again. By Saturday everything is fixed up and even leaves a couple of basic instructions on what needs greasing every week. And he is off again. Few weeks pass, New Year has come around and a line is broken again. He gets called back, and CEO pretends like the previous deal will be used again. He goes in for 2 days, fixes everything, explains couple more things to the team of 6, who by now have other duties, not to be sitting around all day, and when he is about to leave the CEO says tomorrow at 8 am. The guy says what? And the CEO explains you could claim your time off by the end of last year. You just ended your claimed time off, so you are losing the remaining 69 weeks. The guy is furious and he just goes straight and reports the company to workers' rights. They are actually dumbfounded by the time off he has amounted, and the lady serving him calls her colleagues to listen in. They laugh their asses off by his story. And they actually issue a verdict the next day. It usually takes weeks, but apparently they had too much fun with this one. He is to get all of his time off, under the previous rule, for the time accrued up before the rules changed. So he has his 69 weeks, should be 70 due to him getting the one he worked on, renewed by their deal, but he lost that one, and he also has the 6 weeks from the new year. So he goes in with the verdict and gives it personally to a fuming CEO. According to the guy, steam was coming out of his ears. The CEO accepts unwillingly the deal with the guy coming in, for 3 days every 5 weeks off. If he is needed during his time off, tough luck. They should work to produce back stock. A full year goes by, that way, and the guy's is 66. At this point he has been training the 6 slowly every 5 weeks, lol, and he is on his last visit before he takes the last 5 weeks off. The CEO goes to him and delivers personally the firing notice for the first day he will be back. He plays shocked and leaves for another 5 weeks. This one is a problem, because if you apply for retirement, even with half a year early/less, you are losing significantly more than just that small period, and he has about 10 months ahead of him for retirement. His last 5 weeks expire and he goes in to gather his stuff. Only a coffee cup was remaining. He knew this was coming and he had taken everything over time. He gets an extremely big payout for the firing with no cause. Next day he sends a cease and desist letter to the company for the use of the 3 patents. He had talked with the fired guy, who had agreed with this revenge plan. He had also talked with the widow of the now dead friend and colleague, as well, and had both of them on board. He had been supporting actually the widow, but he didn't say anything to anyone. I found out very recently from the other guy about it. So now the company has to stop using those machines and the method with 0 notice. All the competitors have found and built and patented their own versions of the same, and if they don't find a solution, it is going to cost 40% more and take out double time to produce the same part of the procedure of production. So they would need to double the lines, if they go and use the old method, while they look for a new one. After just 3 weeks of looking to license the method of one of the competitors and not getting anywhere, stock being extremely low by that point, they struck a deal with the guy. He will be an external contractor, who obviously keeps the patents to his name. He will be doing the maintenance on his own, will be paid by the hour, what he was previously making on a full day, and he will be on call for maintenance while having one person there at all time for upkeep. He went and stole all 6 of the people he trained, and hired them in his new company and put them to work back at that factory again, with almost double the pay they were receiving. He fully trained them very quickly and he was now getting paid a shit ton. That CEO was fired for almost stopping production. The deal was struck mere hours before backstock ended, and he also cost the company a ton of money by firing that guy. At the funeral of the old owner, many of the old employees met up and told their different stories, and apparently there were 3 more similar cases with patent holders, because the old owner treated his team extremely well. But he apparently was the only one to string them on for almost 2 years by being out on vacation time and getting paid. All of them had a great laugh, including the widow of the owner and his sister, who were the other 2 partners in the factory before it got sold. It was edited to fix mistakes only. Apologies for the hard reading. Update, correction. 2 points I noticed that are not clear. The 6 people he stole from the factory to work for his new company that are then contracted back to the factory are earning what he was making when he worked at the company, and was considered too much. Their salary was extremely lower, so my comment above about them came double is incorrect. Apparently the factory was paying all 6 combined what the hero was making before he got that 15%, so for all of them it was a huge pay raise. I would leave the factory as well if I received an offer for the same exact work but an increase of about 550%. This I learned from the hero, as an update. Apparently at the time that they stroked that last deal for him to work as a contractor, the backstock was 2 hours from finishing. But what was his last ace up his sleeve in negotiating, was that don't forget that I need at least 3 days to fix both lines, so you already need to shut the factory down for 3 days, and every minute you delay this deal it's another minute of the entire factory being down. Apparently a single line couldn't produce enough for production to resume. 2 lines produce about 110 to 120% of the required thing for production to continue, so he needed to get both lines up. The factory actually shut down for almost 4 days. And those idiots didn't pay the workers for those 4 days that they were not working. Which ended up a class action from over 800 workers at the Workers' Rights Office. Which led to a fine and forcing the factory to pay them, and that was the last drop that made the gals overflow. The news got to management from outside the country and ended up costing the CEO his job. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.